Well, Apple finally cops to slowing down your old iPhones and offers up cheaper battery replacements. Is this an adequate response in light of the lack of disclosure? And we're also going to crack open the Pocketnow mailbag and answer your top questions. We've got a lot to talk about. It's a comfy pre-New Year's broadcast, so make sure you're charged and ready for episode 285 of the Pocketnow Weekly. Recorded December 29th at noon Pacific time, this weekly podcast is where we dissect and discuss those gadgets that make our lives mobile. Smartphones, tablets, and wearables. It's all the stuff you wished existed when you were a kid. And by this point in your holiday vacation, you were starting to realize just how much time you had wasted lounging around. I'm Juan Carlos Bagnell, senior editor at PocketNow.com, joined as always by plucky podcast producer Mr. Jules Wong on the East Coast. How's it going, buddy boy?
Well, I just got back from a huge high school reunion, 5 years. So if you're talking about how old you are right now, yeah, I'm definitely feeling all those years just rack up.
You guys did a 5-year high school reunion. That's very ambitious.
Well, I mean, we have a pretty ambitious class leader because she went to Harvard. She basically just gathered all the people up and said, "Hey, let's hold it in this function room and serve the exact same kind of food that we had during prom." I'm not sure if it's like the standard fare to have, penne with marinara sauce and chicken tenders for your prom, and
we Endies. Oh, that's terrible. We didn't have like a full meal. Our prom was like just basically the same as homecoming. You went and ate at a restaurant and then came to dance.
I mean, this time around we had an open bar. That's an improvement.
Yeah, that's definitely progress. See, for us, my graduating class was so not on the ball that we missed our 10-year reunion and we did an 11-year reunion. That's how not paying attention to anything and how not ambitious my graduating class was.
Perfect. That's fine with me. I just avoid all the people you really didn't talk to at high school. That's and then you'll see them for like 5 seconds, and then it's like, hey, and then you're on it.
Going, and then I saw the photos of everyone who was there, and you're like, you know what? None of my friends from high school would have been there. I would have been like the ostracized kid again. I would have been the loser at his own table, just sort of looking at everyone else. It would have been really sad.
Believe it or not, the popular kids, or like the people who found their circles, they sort of felt the same about this whole thing, and we just somehow managed to cobble together 50 people to get into that function room. So
but that's really well done. 5-year high school reunion, not just relying on the Facebooks and the Twitters to keep track of people. I'm proud of you kids, you millennials.
Every single year, and
especially since we just got that news report that like thousands of pounds of avocado just like got torched in some truck accident. So I don't know what you millennials are eating with the price of avocado skyrocketing. So
the other half of it is going to be goat cheese. So like that's our little uppity thing that we're doing too.
So another reason to be mad at Texas. Yeah, it was 40,000 pounds of avocado. You know what we're not going to be talking about for the rest of this podcast is wacky news about food. I think we've got some text.
The millennials. All right. Well, if that's the case, then you want to just dig into our big story. I mean, we had a light week at Pocketnow, just trying to take the holidays for as they are, just being cool and chill and all that. But apparently, Apple couldn't keep its cool with this whole debacle. It's any new good controversy, any meaty controversy that you should have in this space, you have to have it with Apple, and it's talking about batteries, it's talking about processors, it's talking about these issues where people have been finding their iPhone slowing down, their app launch times not coming up as they used to be, especially when we get on the year mark, 2 years. And it was only last week that Apple admitted to slowing down the top processing speeds for its older iPhones. So that would be the iPhone 6S, 6, their Plus models, and the iPhone SE, I think. first wave back in February with iOS 10.2.1. And more recently, with 11.2, we included the iPhone 7 devices with that. So all that happening, and they're finally saying sorry. What am I doing with my Canadian accent? Sorry about it.
Sorry.
Sorry.
We apologize to any Canadians who may or may not be listening. I still don't know.
Accidental Canadian, yeah.
Yeah.
And
Accidental
they just
Canadian.
they did it yesterday with this whole convoluted message, I guess, because there was the way that they termed their apology. We know that feel disappointed from what we did, and
Mhm.
we apologize. So, I mean, you should apologize that you have not been transparent about this practice in the first place, but I mean, that's another story that we can dig into later on the show. In any case, they're offering free, not free battery replacements, but
Just
discounted,
less
heavily
expensive. Yeah, that was another thing that got people lit up, is that they're not offering free battery replacements.
$79 to $29, and this will only start from late January and last through the year of 2018. So, I mean, there was talk, if I remember correctly, back when the iOS 10.2 thing was happening, there was this whole thing about ambient air getting into the manufacturing process, which was causing batteries to not properly deliver and take charge, and that caused
Okay.
sudden shutdowns. And there were rumors back then that Apple would be doing a free battery replacement program, and they didn't. So it was just that little update that never mentioned anything about battery, processor throttling or anything like that. And there was this little this little drama, I guess you could say,
Mm-hmm.
the whole disclosure process, because as far as we know, Apple has only told us about their policy this week. And Renee Ritchie from iMore, through a whole bunch of dissecting on Twitter with fans talking about this issue when it first popped up a couple weeks ago. He said that Apple did in-depth briefings on it almost a year ago, explaining
Yeah.
how batteries age, including prematurely, which was being done to prevent spikes and shutdowns, etc. Tech press knew. That's the insinuation that he's putting out there. And like, as far as my research goes, and as far as anyone else's does, it's Apple's statement on the issue was that it was only like the software was supposed to stop these random shutdowns from happening. It didn't mention anything about performance throttling, and it didn't mention any people like Mark Gurman of Bloomberg said, hey, where are these briefings? Like, were we invited to them? And we had a whole bunch of people, Mobile Syrup, Slash Gear Wired, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, all say about these briefings. So and we, later on, it turns out that I think Seth Weintraub of 9 to 5 was said that they were actually internal briefings too. So
Yeah. Well, and also it's if I really feel, because anything Apple does makes news and is talked about and is rumored and speculated and leaked and pushed and pumped, that if the tone of those conversations and of those media briefs were of the same level that we're seeing today, I think we would have seen more traction on those news pieces back then. I doubt very much that the tone of those conversations was in illustrating the same type of situation that we're talking about today. It reeks a lot. You remember when we were going through Antenna Gate on the iPhone 4,
yeah,
and Apple put out those really helpful videos to show how all phones can face antenna degradation depending on how you're holding it, sort of reinforcing the, well, don't hold your phone that way if you feel there's a problem with the antenna. And I just remember, I think it was a Motorola or maybe it was a Nexus, and the video they show has this guy with like the biggest gorilla hands I had ever seen, like like wrapping all the way around the top of a phone, and to show that the little antenna bars would go down. If you just walk around holding your phone like this, you can have the same kind of antenna degradation as if you just lightly tap an iPhone 4 right here.
So I think that they had their points covered, and that issue was addressed
See,
properly
it's the
to
same. It's
consumers.
across the industry. All phones slow down. So at Apple, we make sure all phones slow down.
Uh, uh, so I mean, so there's that part of it, which is just the scale of the ways that they distort things just to have this narrative of, yeah, everybody does it and Apple's no different, and also we're exceptional in how we manage our phones across the lifespan of the product. So
Well,
like there's
let's get
that.
into the response here. One, I don't know about you, but did you feel that the explanation in the article actually helped this problem? Because I feel a big problem is a problem of disclosure. Do you think that their explanation actually served to educate the public, or do you think that that was more, if we throw a whole bunch of information out there about how chemical batteries degrade over time, that that will help obfuscate our actions or our lack of, or our inaction in properly disclosing this to our customers?
I mean, there will be the people that accept this, and then there will always be the people that tear these things apart. And they might have grounds here. Apple has been sitting on this information for a long time. It is not directly related all this information to the problem at hand, which is slowdowns and whatnot, for the past however long it was, and not letting those consumers know that they were taking these actions to
Right.
throttle
Because
the device
I
to
really
prevent.
feel like this explanation of how batteries degrade makes sense as a blog post in sort of a general discussion forum. I don't feel it was adequate to properly describe the actions that Apple was taking on your phone. That they were purposely engaging in a throttling maneuver. I lack the words. It's holiday brain podcast too.
A5.
Yeah, but that this was inadequate to
I suck
properly
your mouth.
describe what it was that Apple was really doing to your phone, how the consumer was not being properly notified that this is what they were doing, and that these actions seem to come at those yearly intervals where consumers were likely starting to shop a new phone anyway. And had there been proper disclosure, I feel that there would have been a not insignificant number of consumers who would have opted for the $90 battery replacement over buying a whole new phone. And that's been one of the common threads on the replies that I've been getting personally on Twitter. People who are also upset, like, I've got an iPhone 5S. Why isn't my phone on the list of devices for a less expensive battery replacement?
Well,
And
this goes to one of the passages here. First and foremost, we have never and would never do anything to intentionally shorten the life of any Apple product or degrade the user experience to drive customer upgrades. Like the fancy term for planned obsolescence. And we've seen these reports of these benchmarks being run on iPhone 5, 5S, back
Mhm.
through the fours and whatnot, about the same behavior going on, the same kind of deterioration that has been fessed up to that. And as far as Apple's concerned, at this point, they already have enough of a brouhaha to handle with
Well,
this.
I think their wording there is very telling. We are not purposely degrading in an effort to encourage new sales. Because they are purposely degrading, and it just so happens that these life cycles of products on their own come at these yearly intervals. To me, it makes me cynical because I don't believe that everyone at Apple is working in lockstep as some kind of grand conspiracy to mess up your phone and get you to buy the new one, mustache twirl, mwahahaha. But look at their behavior on things like the iPhone 5. The iPhone 5 had documented battery problems. Apple did not address the battery problems on the iPhone 5 until just weeks before the launch of the iPhone 6. Well, where
Motivations
were we
don't
with the
match.
iPhone 6? Back then,
Yeah,
we
the
were a
motivations
lot
don't
of
match the reality of the circumstance of the product cycle and what is being the intentions, and I should probably just get a new iPhone instead. I mean, the new one's already out, and you
exactly,
know
because, right at that time, someone was likely already shopping a new phone. So why would I spend this time to deal with a warranty issue and go into an Apple store and swap this phone out and back up my data? I could just get a new phone. And it's going to be on contract because that's when we were still doing 2-year contracts. So because of actions like that in the past, and where every major generation of iPhone has had some kind of issue that the S version fixes, it does make me more cynical as to Apple's reply here. And especially in light of, well, it's a cheaper battery replacement. I understand you couldn't do this for free, probably, but I also want to
I
see
mean,
that
we
software
weren't even
response where they
clear.
enable a toggle that allows people to use the full power of their phone again, even if it means a detriment to battery life. Now, that's where we'll see, does Apple actually keep such a small battery on the smaller iPhone with like practically no buffer, that it will become a problem? Because the chipsets in Apple phones are very powerful. They're usually a whole generation ahead of Qualcomm hardware. Those A series processors are great. But on the smaller iPhone, they have such tiny batteries. Is there no buffer for that known expected degradation where the power draw from the CPU can actually cause the phone to shut off? And that's what I'm curious to see. Can they actually enable the full power of this phone, or is this gimped by design because of the size that they want the iPhone to come at, and then also the idea of planned obsolescence, the time frame for which they want you to upgrade to a newer iPhone?
I suppose that they do have the ability to enable full powered, override, because they have this smart, intelligent battery technology, just like any other OEM should have.
Right.
That says, hey, let's read the age of the battery. Oh, it's
Oh
this
yeah, I
age.
just
That means
mean,
you should.
but I want to see, because we know that the amount of juice that you can pump out of a 2-year-old battery does degrade over time too. And we know that on the smaller iPhone, Apple puts in the bare minimum battery capacity to help you make it through a day. And so after say 2 years of that battery starting to wear down, you're having to charge it every day, you're maybe down to like 80% of its original capacity. Is it still
Well, if we're talking
powerful
about
enough to
modeling
properly
specs,
drive the
specs
CPU? Because if
about
it's not,
around the battery,
you'll see
then
that iPhone shut off and reboot.
yeah. I mean, it's those those peak events where sometimes they need like the flash on a camera that typically needs a reservoir of power or a sudden burst of power, and that may, trigger one of those events. I'm just saying, for example. But in terms of being of modeling specs around capacity of a battery, I mean, Apple continues. It was rumored to continue to be doing this with rumored true depth camera, Face ID, and such
Mhm.
improvements going on into the 2019 iPhones, and they're planning on extending their battery cell technology to a 2-cell unit. I mean, there's a whole bunch of complicating factors as we go into the future to see what kind of processing that they do, and whether or not Apple tells people about them, about that, because uh, if there's a way that one cell could be used instead of the other, and like you wouldn't have to deal with having to replace batteries all the time. And I mean, there is a chance for Apple to come out of this with a better, a clean slate, or a better slate than they had before, just from actually innovating.
Yeah, I this is where I think the smartphone industry in general is facing some growing pains. If you use a phrase, and I'm just picking on this phrase specifically because of my idea on smartphones plateauing, but actually innovating. I think we're in a very iterative climate for all smartphone manufacturers where we're seeing some cool design changes. We're seeing things like different aspect ratio screens, marginal bumps to camera quality, some nice bumps to processing power, but I'm not seeing that kind of revolutionary, exciting evolution of these products. It's usually like little touches here, little touches there, and refinement. And I think that's kind of where we're at. And Apple stands to be hurt by this most of all if if they can't keep convincing consumers emotionally that jumping onto the newest iPhone is the lifestyle upgrade that they need. And it's things like this, when it comes out that they're degrading performance over time, right around the time that you'd be upgrading your phone, trying to push that upgrade. It's sort of a double whammy to the emotional identity, the lifestyle identity of a brand like Apple.
Well, so I'm wondering why now? Why choose now to have all this put out, and why even respond to it when this has been an ongoing controversy for years? When this could have been stemmed off, this could have been, this controversy could have been prevented by just explicitly stating that you're slowing it down for this benefit. A lot of pain that we could have bypassed here, and I'm not sure where Apple finds a way out of this just by telling it in late December 2017.
Well, it just takes a while for any idea. I mean, if we're talking about like viral videos and memes, because this is what's happening with Apple right now. It takes time for that critical mass to hit. And so anecdotally, there's always been that idea new software slows down your older phone, your battery degrades over time, your phone just wears out, heat kills electronics, especially if your phone's like being used for a lot of gaming, it's running it really hot. And so we have all of this fog of conversation that's very anecdotal, very colloquial, very conversational. And it took just a couple key elements, because who was it that put out the article um initially about actually testing the performance of iPhones over time? It wasn't BGR.
I Hold on, give me a second here. I think that was well, it was Geekbench, but
Geekbench.
Primate Labs. Yeah.
But when we actually saw some kind of procedural method for testing this claim. And so it took a while even from then for that conversation to reach some sort of jumping off point. And because of that whole fog, that actually served as kindling. All of these people that had these sort of notions about their phone slowing down are going to be attuned to someone making a claim about actual interference on their device. And it's coming at the perfect time, just in general, with stories about people who are concerned about apps using the microphone on your phone to listen in on your conversations, companies that are intercepting web traffic at the ISP level to feed you ads and try and get you to upgrade your modem. This is all in the zeitgeist right now. So a major manufacturer interfering with your device without disclosing what they're doing, that's a trigger point right now. So you add that to the general perception of your phone slowing down, how expensive these phones are getting, $1,000 smartphones. We're in that era now. You mash all of that together, give it just a little time to kind of smolder, and then it sets off a blaze. And that's where we're seeing, I think, the response right now. I think now was the time because of all of those factors coming together like they did.
Well, I mean, the other factors for sure definitely cling on and add weight to the situation, but I've seen many different in an empirical not empirical, but statistical breakdowns of this whole thing over and over again, and along with the Reddit threads and the Twitter outrage. And it's like, what I mean, did all those other things really tip things over, just by being themselves?
No, not just by being themselves, but what I mean is I think it's just the combination of a series of events that leads to Apple being in the wrong place at the wrong time for this to be a story they could control.
It
And
thought
that's
that there were too
kind of
many
definitely
possible conspiracies.
Yeah, well, and we're ready for it. Like politics is crazy right now. Science discussion is kind of crazy right now. Consumer electronics chat is kind of crazy right now. And now is the right time for this kindling to actually ignite. And this was the wrong time for Apple to think that they could control that part of the narrative. A year ago, apparently, they were able to. Now this story has gotten out of their control, and we can always see how companies do a terrible job of replying to these types of issues. Again, if they had just disclosed this property to consumers and given them some stupid toggle switch, what do you call a placebo button
Yeah.
buried in their settings, the
Well,
FTC wouldn't
not
have.
even the placebo button, because that itself would be dissected over and over again.
Well, but that's just it, is like, again, the disclosure on this is what kills companies. This is when they put mechanics like this operating in the background, and then those mechanics are discovered, it looks 10 times worse than if they had just told you up front. And you could have been annoyed about it, but look at how many times, especially for iPhone users, they're annoyed by something, but yeah, they'll still buy the next one when it
Yeah,
comes
I
out.
don't think that would have been a sales depressant, as opposed to,
At all.
taking your chance in court for $999 billion or whatever those freaking class actions are going for these days. So yeah, it's so I guess at this point there's nothing we can do but look forward. Um, Battery replacements have free. Is the data's pay like iOS 10.2.1, they promised that there would be a little indicator that said that the battery started would need replacing. In which case, I mean, why if there was that indicator, why didn't that show up, or why, well, like, wasn't more reporting being done on that kind of thing? Where does that lie in conjunction with the throttling practices here?
Well, I mean, that's kind of difficult to unpack until we see what Apple sets the thresholds at. If a phone is 6 months old and then it starts to show battery degradation and the phone is egging you on to go and get your battery replaced, that's going to be a very frustrating situation for people who have $1,000 phones. I don't know that we'll be able to comment on that until we see what their actual solution resembles in real world use. But I'm already planning some, probably by the end of 2018. I'll throw my iPhone SE out and get the battery swapped out because I love that little phone. Um, I'll be curious to see if a future iOS update starts telling me, "Oh, hey, dude, your tiny little phone needs a new battery." What that's going to resemble is going to make a huge difference to me in whether or not it's a useful feature, or if it's another annoying, cynical thing that Apple can try and convince us to spend yet even more money on their products.
Yeah. So, uh, so there's that. They're going to introduce a new interface, a new and improved interface for battery health as well. And what other than the replace? Do you think the time frame of the replacement program any bit wrong here, or like is odd in any aspect?
I mean, not on its face. I just would have preferred something that was a more open-ended policy, given the nature of their transgression. I really feel for people because I know there is a not insignificant number of people still on the iPhone 5 and 5S, and leaving them out was, to me, kind of a crappy thing to do.
Mm, all right. So there's all that. I'm wondering at this point how much pain, loss of worth, like useful worth in an iPhone, and loss of productivity as a result, these plaintiffs claim, and if a judge will be swayed by this. I mean, what's your take on the legal argument here?
Oh, I think there is a significant legal argument to be made. Again, all they needed to do was say that this was a mechanic that operated on your phone, and they wouldn't have had any problems. I don't think there would have been any grounds for legal action. The fact that this was excluded, excuse me, from any kind of TOS I think now you do have an argument to be made. It's just whether or not you can face down Apple's lawyers, or if you can convince them that enough people are pissed off that they'll just settle to get it out of the news cycle as quickly as possible. That where I don't think they can do that though are when we start looking at the differences in trade and regulation, especially throughout Europe. It's the French the lawsuit that's going on in France right now that I think is very compelling as to how this is going to be treated throughout the EU. And right
Yeah.
now, Apple isn't a very popular company in the EU because of things like tax dodging. So any opportunity that those regulators have in sticking it to Apple, I think they're going to take those opportunities and run with them as hard as they can, which is going to tie up Apple's legal team for a significant amount of time as they sort of have to deal out different penalties and different solutions for different markets.
Europe, they have two different devils here. It's tax evasion and privacy, which splits Apple between the rest of the companies, because if you can't have one, you have to have the other, and all the data that is available
Yeah.
there. Renato Laporte with using the PN Weekly hashtag. Besides having bigger batteries, Android phones are using higher core count, big little configuration since forever. A few cores running at medium are more energy efficient than one or two in turbo power. The Apple A series is starting to do this. I don't think they used to prior to like the A7 or 8. Now they have more cores, and they're splitting it between, I think it's a 2 and 4 kind of performance and
Mhm.
kind of medium thing going on there. But in any case, I just wanted to, as a policy within itself, of just being able to limit the processing power if if needed be, policy for Android OEMs that to maybe adopt or something like that, or at least provide the option to. I mean, I'm not sure how the logistics on be for that.
Well, it was in Android land because this is something that Google only recently started tackling too. I would say with Nougat, some of the advanced power management settings, but manufacturers would put on their own low power modes,
Mm,
extended runtime modes, and then ultra low power. I mean, Samsung really made a lot of noise about their two stage. You could kind of reduce stuff and keep things from running in the background. And then if you were down to like your last 10%, we'll shut everything off on this phone
yeah,
and try and keep your battery lasting as long as possible. And we
but
also saw,
that's
of
not a
course,
yeah, but that's not a practical way to use your phone on a daily basis if you're using it
well,
for
there was a
the.
time there, especially like Galaxy S2 and Galaxy S3 era, where anything that you would do to kind of restrict the functionality of the device, we would customize and do it ourselves. And so, especially getting into like the S4 era, I used to run my phone in low power mode for most of the day just because, LTE was such a new tech. And if you were stuck between different towers, or you're cycling and switching from 3G to 4G, your battery would just get wrecked. And so, there were times where I would manually activate that just to make sure that my phone would last the day, and I would use it that way throughout the day. So have already been ideas of this kind of user management. I mean, not exactly the same. I'm using this as an analogy to what we're expecting Apple to do in terms of just reactivating full performance on an iPhone. But it's not something that's a totally alien or a totally foreign concept to the smartphone market. It's just something that Apple used to convince their customers you didn't have to worry about. We manage the performance of your phone so you can just touch square, get app. Now I think iOS users are confronted with the notion of some kind of oil change like maintenance as their phones age. And this is something that they've been sold on that they didn't have to do. But if you want to really maximize the investment of an iPhone, it's something you now need to pay attention to.
Yeah. PN Weekly from Andrew Wallace, with Apple's recent battery throttling issues. I hope that more OEMs start offering battery replacements for older devices for a
Yeah,
fee.
me too.
To some extent, third-party services may be able to do that. Your local repair shop, for example. Peter Hayton, in response to that, it would look great to offer this service, but I guess OEMs probably don't like the super cycle they they don't like super
Yeah,
cycle, and
like
I therefore
describing it
guess.
as like a weather front. So if they were to just put out something like this, it would cause like a peak usage of that service. And therefore, I guess they will
I mean,
continue to
yeah.
try and sell new rather than repair older phones. I think again, the novelty
I
of
mean,
it.
maybe introduce it with a new product. I mean, because like
And
we've seen the shattered glass replacement.
yeah,
They
so I mean, something like that, I think will actually be taken advantage of very, very little. Because I think about for the generations, a fan of the show, Kyle Ruggles, photographer up north. He was actually tweeting with me about just, hey, remember the V20 had a removable battery? It was like the last premium phone of its era that still had that ability. And I doubt very many people really took advantage of features like that. So if a company were to come out and say, hey, we're doing a low cost battery replacement program for older phones, there could be a noticeable effect on sales of newer phones, but I seriously doubt it will actually tank, a company's forecast. And if anything else, will just serve to reinforce why a customer should do business with that company. And then they'll just go off and buy the new phone instead of getting the battery replacement anyway.
I mean, Renato again makes a good point. How many 2-year-old phones still get updates on Android? And as far as we know, Motorola and HTC don't explicitly put down their processors. So
Yeah, they
yeah,
both they both publicly claimed they do not engage in throttling. And of course, the reply to that is just, well, in Android land, how about we focus on, instead of beating our chests and patting ourselves on the back for not throttling phones, maybe we should be a bit more attentive to things like updating older phones so they can remain competitive at a time where privacy and security issues are key among a lot of consumers. Even just getting bug fixes and security patches
how many
and
2-year-old phones still get updates on Android?
how many 18-month-old phones are still getting, actual software attention? So, I mean,
Hey,
I was
Moto G4 users, are you happy with the deal that you got?
well, and again, that Moto was acting like they were being so magnanimous.
Oh,
If
with the yeah, it's our mistake. So we're gonna do the Moto G4 Plus because we said so, and it was like, yeah,
it's
no.
because we said so, if we don't do it now, we'll get sued. That's not like that's not holding your own company to any kind of standard. That's just CYA, man. And because I don't even expect a 2-year-old Android phone to keep getting major operating system updates, but with how many
Hmm.
security threats there are out there, to not be delivering security patches and bug fixes
If
is
anything, they
still
don't make enough
unacceptable.
clear, a clear guideline for that because, again, bringing up Motorola, they say that their mid-ranger phones are only guaranteed a 1-year window for OS updates, and that was something that was new to us. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
And it's also
all right.
just the public perception. This is from Andrew Sislak using the PN Weekly hashtag. People need to hold Apple accountable. If Samsung or HTC did this, everyone would be flipping out. We can't keep letting Apple get free passes to do whatever they want. And this is the thing I'll be curious to see. We're in the era of the $1,000 phone. I do get some people grumbling about some of the issues and bugs on the iPhone 10. That iOS 11 still hasn't been completely cleaned out of some issues regarding the performance of that phone. And now we get this type of disclosure from Apple that they engaged in a non-disclosed throttling program, uh, supposedly for consumer benefit. Is this something that will resonate enough that someone who was planning on buying an iPhone decides that they're not going to buy a new iPhone? And I doubt that that's the case. There is no competition for the iPhone. If I'm mad at Sony, I can go and buy a ZTE or Huawei or a Samsung or an HTC or any other number of devices. If I'm mad at one Android manufacturer, I can go spend my money somewhere else. I can vote with my wallet and not have to leave my ecosystem. If I'm mad at Apple, I'm kind of stuck. That's it. Like
Yeah.
I don't expect that a lot of people are going to switch ecosystems just because there was a problem, and we've seen this consistently. iPhone 4, Antenna gate, iPhone 5, battery problems, iPhone 6, bend gate, and sales have still been growing. Sales have still been climbing, and Apple has probably the top customer retention of any manufacturer out there.
Yeah, I mean they're still raising up those conversion rates from Android, so that's if anything, the competition right there is going to be a little bit to Apple's side. But in a few moments, we will be talking about potential changes in competition on the tail end of this whole net neutrality repeal, what the FCC did. We're going to rehash this thing one more time for 2017, but not before we give a little shout out to our sponsor.
Yes, and this week's episode of the Pocketnow Weekly is brought to you by Oopsie. This sponsor could not have picked a better time to sponsor this podcast.
I thought it was Upsy.
Upsie? I've been saying oopsie. I apologize tremendously if
I don't
I have been saying this wrong. But Upsie actually makes sense too.
you.
I say oopsie though, because this year is the first year in working tech in many years that I've actually damaged the review devices. Did you know that many retailers mark up warranties on the items they sell between anywhere? Oh, we're going to take that all over again. Did you know that many retailers mark up warranties on the items you buy anywhere from 1 to 500%? In fact,
I
most
did
people
not.
don't realize it's where most big box retailers make a majority of their profits. Meanwhile, you have no idea what's covered by your warranty, and you know that receipt is going to wind up in a shoebox in your closet, never to be seen again. Thankfully, there's a better way. Started by a guy who learned the ins and outs of the warranty industry and was tired of consumers getting screwed at the register, Oopsie sells you up to 70% on Oopsie saves you up to 70% on warranties versus traditional retailers, so you know exactly what's covered before you buy. Better yet, Oopsie will save all your warranties and receipts in one convenient place. You can even use Oopsie to protect the items you buy, including holiday gifts, weeks after you buy them. Now, that's actually a pretty big deal because my wife was actually considering holding on to the Pixel 2 until a bunch of other things went wrong with that phone. But one of the things that turned her off was we couldn't transfer the phone and re up a 2-year warranty. The only solution Google had was to return the phone, wait for the refund, which took weeks, and then rebuy the phone, adding the warranty at the time of purchase. And so she instead went with a Huawei P10. Head on over to oopsie.com. That's UPSIE.com and use the promo code Pocket Now for 10% off your first purchase. That's oopsie.com, promo code Pocket Now. And with the free Oopsie app, you can purchase coverage, access your account information, and start the claims process all with the push of a button from your phone. Oopsie.com, Pocket Now, promo code 10% off your first purchase. And we thank them for supporting the Pocketnow Weekly.
We do indeed. And with that out of the way, I think it's time that we get into our monthly mailbag segment, monthly mailbag segment. And as always, you can you can send your emails, send your questions that we'll get to at the end of the month using the email address. I was about to say hashtag PN Weekly, but that's not how you say it
Well,
these
and
days.
we do have a couple tweets using the PN Weekly hashtag that I'm going to throw into the mailbag too.
Yeah, indeed. So podcast at pocketnow.com. We would love to see an old-fashioned few paragraphs about what gets your gears grinding and whatnot. So definitely send this send a thought or two along to us. We'll definitely read it. And we start off this episode with a little thing about net neutrality and competition from Krista Lindsay. Hi guys, do you think the repeal of net neutrality will result? I'm going to take that from the top again, just like you. Hi guys, do you think the repeal of net neutrality will result in more competition for ISPs and that the consumer might actually benefit from it? It seems logical that some providers might want to offer better packages at lower rates to increase their business. Thanks.
So what do you think, Jules? Do you think there's the potential for increased competition?
That's the groundwork of things. But when we get into what these ISPs are actually doing, they're gobbling up lots of media companies and they're bundling that into what they're offering, because if they can be the producer as well as the distributor, and they already have the infrastructure for that, that's amazing. And they can, they can get synergies from that. So in terms of offering just basic service, I don't, they will have less of a motivation to do that, just from the fact that they can always, build upon it and bring
Yeah, the
these
margin
packages and
more
get
likely. Yeah.
margins. So there's always that, but it's not just because you can't just say more competition results in lower prices always, because we're seeing this right now in the cellular industry in the US with Sprint and T-Mobile walking away from a potential merger. And we would have seen a vastly better network on both ends, where both have generally been disparaged by many tests across several years. And this would have put them in line with AT&T and Verizon. This would have put them in line in terms of subscriber numbers as well. And instead, SoftBank decided to walk away and keep ownership of Sprint. And now what they're trying to do at Sprint is just cut back on the promos and start investing in their network again. And they're facing plenty of challenges in that process. They have bond maturities that they need to pay up soon, and 5G is going to take at least a couple of years to trickle down and get to the towers. And already AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile have plans for next year. So
Yeah.
they're facing a challenge, and they're keeping prices. They're planning on keeping prices up. Sprint has been the cut rate provider for cellular for a long time. They've been pushing it down, $85 for unlimited, 70, 60, at one point 50, and now they're kind of going back up a bit. And that has always allowed carriers to play around in lower ranges than they usually have. If $100 service bundle package, maybe we can drop that down to 90 or 80. Verizon did that with its unlimited plan. They started out with an $80 plan, just to, after the vitriol of T-Mobile, of John Ledger, just calling them out. They finally caved, which was a good thing. And now we're also seeing T-Mobile, which has all started to compete in prices. They've started, bundling up these services from third parties like Netflix and GoGo Wi-Fi and
Well, it
whatnot.
was like they did Netflix and then Sprint did Hulu. Was that the partnership that they did?
Yes, Sprint did Hulu because they're trying. So
Their Sprint is like their tagline should be, "Well, bless them, they're trying."
bless their hearts, as they say in the South.
Bless their hearts.
Yep. So again, like they're keeping the line on prices because at some point they have to start reinvesting in their network.
Yeah.
And their analysts are saying that TNT and Verizon might just start going back up as well. So where especially as we head
So
into
so
the 5G era, this is going to be a tough one.
yeah, so Krista, the reason why I'm skeptical that we'll see an increase in competition, um, we did not have net neutrality as an actual regulatory leverage until 2015. I feel that we can look to the ISP and wireless industry prior to 2015, so from 2004 to 2014, and see if we can detect any trends. And the trends that I think a lot of us would see would be, instead of trying to actually compete for customer dollars, most internet service providers engaged in policy that allowed them to either merge, acquire, or to cordon off neighborhoods to prevent competition. I think the LA market is an excellent example of that, where we're served by several large ISPs but none of them compete directly. So if you're in an AT&T Uverse area, you cannot get Time Warner Cable, or now it's Spectrum.
They
I live in a
they've been able
Spectrum
to
neighborhood.
negotiate down to the zip code. Yeah.
Well, and it's very much like gerrymandering a district politically. You just carve up these areas, and that will prevent you from actually needing to compete on service. Instead, you have a de facto monopoly over that area. And that's the practice that we saw these companies engaging in. Net neutrality really won't address competition on the ground directly like that. If the internet is regulated like a service or like electricity or like water, like a resource like that, eventually we could make the argument that, if it's a utility, then we can loosen up on some of the restrictions for things like telephone pole access, or how we dig trenches to run fiber to home, things like that. But that's not really the first wave of what net neutrality is going to address. Title II regulation really, I don't think, will have a near term effect on that kind of policy. Ultimately, I would prefer a free market solution, but deregulating at the top right now, with the way that the United States is carved up into different media districts, and very few areas have any kind of real competition. I think it's something like 18% of the country is still unserved by any solution, and 20% of the market is served by only one cable or internet solution. So almost 40% of the United States has zero or one company that they can do business with to get onto the internet. And so ultimately, what I'm looking at for competition, if we really want to improve competition, I actually do very much agree with the libertarian idea that there is too much regulation. Net neutrality isn't the regulation we should be afraid of. If Title II regulation is what gave us competition in the telephone space, and was how we leveraged divestiture, breaking up mom pa bell. If you're on Sprint, T-Mobile, or Verizon, they wouldn't exist if we hadn't broken up AT&T, and that was through government regulation. And so ultimately, the regulations that we need to start chipping away at are the state and city regulations that prevent competition. I think Colorado is an excellent example of communities banding together to start trying to offer municipal taxpayer funded
Yeah.
broadband, because major
Georgia.
corporations weren't getting it done. You
Yeah.
need to start lobbying to let Google Fiber into your neighborhoods, because the only time we've seen cable companies and AT&T really start fighting and competing on service and price are in areas where another outlet is already offering fiber. And so if we start from the bottom up, eventually we'll get to a point where we won't be as afraid of net neutrality style violations. But if we just deregulate the industry from the top down, then the major players in this market, who are already winners in this market, will have free reign to craft whatever policy they want. And they're not accountable to the people. They're only accountable to their shareholders.
Because if anything, private and people in general just resent publicly owned stuff and would never want to use it, but they end up using it anyways and benefiting it off of it. Sort of like how Chattanooga somehow was able to get a fiber network laid out just because
No,
it
no, no.
was
The
already
Chattanooga
there. And
story. So if you're a patriot, you should care about this. The Chattanooga story is amazing because one of the things that helped get their municipal broadband initiative off the ground was
it
a
was
grant
Tom
from the
Brady.
Department of Energy. Yeah, it was Tom Brady. That arm on Tom Brady, he's just slinging fiber all over Chattanooga. No, the thing that's exciting about Chattanooga was part of the grant that helped build that network was footed by the Department of Energy, because they were looking at fiber broadband networks being the backbone of a new power grid for the United States. The United States energy grid is so old and is so decrepit that if a foreign interest were to knock out, I think something like 6 or 7 processing nodes that sort of join parts of the network together, you could leave half of the country without power for weeks. That's how
Uh,
precarious the situation has become. And the main tool at our disposal is fiber to home, where we would be able to intelligently control the flow of power at a granular level from home to power node. And that to me is really the exciting part of trying to move forward with municipal funded broadband, is because through the power company, now we have this as a legit resource, as a legit utility for something that we all depend on. And then I feel companies can compete on top of that. If a company can compete better than your power company, do business with them. But I think the bare minimum standard should be broadband delivered through the same resource that power comes from, so that way we can actually improve on our aging infrastructure.
yeah, and if you want to learn more about this, further reading, I would suggest Ted Koppel's "Lights Out." Uh, Good book on that topic.
Totally.
So,
Real
yeah,
quick before we move on, we do have one tweet from Joel GJ, just asking a question that I think is worth following up on. Hashtag PN Weekly. Then there's the factor of the power of the FTC to go against these bad business practices. And the reason why I feel the FTC is inadequate is because the FTC can't set policy like the FCC can. And as long as a company discloses its business practices, the FTC can't go after them for violating. So as long as
it's reactionary,
it's
and it
only
takes so much
reaction,
time.
and as long as a company discloses we will throttle Netflix and they put that in the terms of service, the FTC has no regulatory power. That business is doing business by the terms of the service agreement, whereas the FCC actually will have regulatory power over the industry to craft policy and look at what potential consumer abuses can come that aren't just disclosures in your terms of service. The FTC isn't necessarily a bad play, but it's woefully inadequate to address the actual regulatory abuses that we see today and we've seen since 2004.
Mm. So there you go. I understand that you also have a couple of other tweets that you want
Oh,
to get to.
definitely.
Yeah, the hashtag.
And so, one of the things I want to expand on a little bit. Last week, we talked about potential YouTube competitors and Andrew Wallace. I think we mentioned it during the broadcast, but I saved it because I wanted to see if we could expand on the conversation a little bit more. Hashtag PN Weekly. How could Amazon have a different monetization strategy from YouTube and be successful in serving smaller content creator videos, aka the $1 million question? How do you make money with these videos on the internet and do battle against an entity like YouTube?
I would say ju- subsidize it. I think it's one of the things that you have to be willing to make profits elsewhere just to support something that has that improves your position as one of these good person companies that stands up for consumers, what consumers want and their rights. And just it's sort of like how a lot of TV networks used to, news was a loss making for them, and they subsidized that with successful ratings and dramas and other
Yeah.
primetime programming. So yeah.
Jules, I think for maybe the first time in our history as being co-producers on this podcast, I am completely in agreement with you. Like literally 100%. My answer to that was, don't worry about trying to make an Amazon tube successful and monetized as its own separate entity, but tie that into the affiliates program that Amazon already offers and use
Yeah.
that as a loss leader so that people can go consume video on Amazon. They'll still get ad revenue from whatever they put on those videos, but then it becomes a secondary benefit where people are giving Amazon information, their viewing habits, and Amazon can target those people with better products and services on the back end.
I mean, I know you're not a 503c company, but it's like you have if you have the board of directors support and you have the mission for it, then go do it, and somewhere along the line you'll be able to justify that in the balance books. So
Totally. And so this one comes from, I'm so gonna butcher this last name, from Diego Abasabaili. I was just sort of posting some random news on my personal Twitter account, and one of the stories that I found very disappointing over this last week was Lastpass. The Android Lastpass Authenticator app apparently has this hugely open security flaw that is easily replicatable, where if even if you don't put in your password, you can kind of get around it just by pushing settings and then push more information, and then you can get through on the back end. And apparently this was a situation that had been going on for some time. The person who discovered the flaw reached out to LastPass directly, didn't hear anything from them, and I think after a week with no action taken, published his own blog post on a hacker site, hackernoon.com. And so Diego dropped us the comment, upset that only after threats of disclosure did LastPass decide to take action on this. Again, disclosure seems to be the big problem with a lot of companies. I don't know about you, Jules, but if you had a security app on your phone and they got out ahead of a security threat, notified you, told you what the threat was, don't you think you would have more faith in that app?
Who would you want to do the disclosing?
Yeah, exactly. Or do you want this discovered by someone who's not going to disclose the security threat and just exploit the security threat on devices?
Yeah. So, and the story becomes 50 million accounts have been compromised because of this data breach.
That's a way worse story than the headline LastPass discovers security flaw in Authenticator app,
Sorry, where's that
notifies
venture capital going?
users.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Yeah, very disappointed. And we were just seeing progress. Android O opening up support for these types of security apps and password managers and stuff. And like, this is a bad look for a company, in my opinion, where they're not getting ahead of their own problems and ahead of their own PR.
For something, I mean, we've regarded these sorts of security authentication programs as like a next frontier, that we're not, we don't have to remember passwords anymore, and that this would be the ultimate security safeguard. Looking to be this way because it falls down to every, the least common denominator, which is not fixing things constantly.
Totally.
Because that if you're not looking for a problem, someone else will.
Yeah. Well, I not to plug my other podcast, but the book that we read this month was Little Brother by Cory Doctorow. I think he's an editor over at Boing Boing still. But he writes a lot about these types of issues like security and privacy and copyright. And in that book, there's just this line like, the best security is security out in the open. If you think you can hide how your security works, then all someone's going to do is break it, keep it quiet, and then exploit the flaw in your security. The best thing is, sort of sunlight is the best disinfectant. And so hopefully LastPass gets their acting gear there, because they're a pretty well respected name for this type of solution.
They better well. All right. So
I got a tweet here from Russell Santos. What do you think about how we're doing segments? We've kind of backed off real audio reviews, real camera reviews, but this comes from @Rachel's dad. Since we are living amidst a dongle revolution, here's an idea for a new video. How about you use one phone and compare different universal dongles? Google has one, Essential has one, Razer, and then you can also compare them against no-name dongles like this. And he links like another $5 USB-C audio dongle. What do you think, Jules? Is that
I think
something that people are really clamoring for? Is more audio
there's a
analysis?
mandate for at least one video on this, and I'm not, a little glib there, but I'm not joking, because Google has made the case for USB-C spec adherence, and it's been insisting on doing that. It has a dongle that can work with any USB-C port, and frankly speaking, if everyone just followed that damn spec and not customize their ports to be, you know I don't even think Thunderbolt 3 should be a thing. If anything, that should be the standard USB-C spec. I know there would be more cost to it, but if we're talking about a universal standard, why not just make it Thunderbolt 3? But in any case, at
actually,
least in the early stages.
Because I want that. I want that bad. But I wonder, is there a way to do a mobile Thunderbolt? I always kind of felt like you needed that full front end PCI bus infrastructure to have like full support for Thunderbolt. Like that's why USB-C, USB 3, I should say,
Yeah.
is easier to implement in mobile devices.
Yeah, I should be clear. USB. I'm wondering what the 3.1 spec is now. Then, well, there's a whole bunch of that complicates things. But in general, we're in the aching, growing pain stage. I think this is a series that would be good for at least a few videos.
Totally. I'll have to see what we confront. Because buying them shouldn't be a problem. I think we're talking about like $50 worth of dongles.
Pretty much.
So I'll take that first spin. I'll see if I can pull that off. And the last tweet that I want to get to with the PN Weekly hashtag. This is I'm gonna put you on the spot here, Jules. 2017, pretty good year for phones. We're getting excited for next year's phones. This is coming from Alberto9324. Quick question. If you had to use a phone from 2016 as your daily driver, which one? And then I have a follow-up question right after that.
Well, for if we were to set this for the next year, I would say the HTC 10.
HTC
Pretty
10.
simple
Okay.
for me.
And what phone from 2015 would you use?
I was about to swear here, and I would, but I'll tell you to flip off. Um, let's see, freak, freak. Because that's the Snapdragon 810 year, and I just don't want to that. And what was that was the iPhone 6s. It was a better year for the iPhone 6s than for Android, so I guess I would go with an iPhone 6s.
Okay. So my answers last year, 2016 phone, I would use the LG V20. I'd just go back to my LG V20, which got a lot of use last year already. And my answer for 2015 would be to skip all of them and go back to a Galaxy Note 4.
Ooh,
So I'd
yeah,
go back to a 2014 phone instead of using any phones from 2015. That would be my answer.
I mean, you're kind of cheating, but I mean I guess that's still an acceptable answer. I'd accept it.
And then just to wrap us all up on this mailbag, and I want to thank everyone who submitted questions and tweeted us with the PN Weekly hashtag. This is from @FatProduce, friend of the show, Andrew Wallace. End of the year! Exclamation point. What are your dream phones for the end of 2017?
I want a
Jules,
phone. I want a steamed ham phone.
well, Renato writes the Nokia 3310
4G.
4G. So that's his dream phone. You're on a Pixel 2, man. Isn't that your dream phone for 2017?
I'm on a
Isn't that
Pixel 2, and where the freak is my Essential phone? There it is.
woo woo? Oh, when did you pick up the Essential? I saw you posted a photo of that.
Was it last week? Yeah, I think it was last week up in New Hampshire. I wanted to take advantage of Sprint's $145 thing going on, but it was just such a hard time to get it through. Sprint said it would ship by December 20, and then they pushed me back to January 3rd, and I was like, nope. So I bought it unlocked from Best Buy Mobile for
No Sprint.
$450.
No.
And now I am paying, and now I have this on the credit card, and also the rest of the V20 that I still have technically on the line for Sprint. So yeah, hooray for me.
Hooray for you. I don't know. I'm kind of torn. This was a good year for phones, but I still kind of feel like no one has made the perfect one phone. The LG V30 gets stupid close. I still very much enjoy the combination of V30 and Huawei Mate. Just like last year, it was V20 and Mate 9. This year, the two phones I kind of pick up the most are the V30 and the Mate 10. But there's still these little things like when we flew to Albuquerque for Thanksgiving, it was all about where is it? It's over here. It's all about my little Xperia Compact. I loved traveling with this phone. When I was out at IFA, it was all about my BlackBerry Key 1, just knowing I would have, crazy long battery life. I kind of want to mash up.
I mean,
Like I need to smush all these phones into one.
that's the advantage. Well, I mean, because you're using it for different, purposes. You're traveling with them or whatnot, and then you have the
Yeah,
dedicated one for your, photo shoots. So I think that's it's one of the advantages of being in the position that you are, just
oh,
reviewing
totally.
text. So I
Well, and
think
also totally acknowledging my use is completely atypical for how people normally use their phones.
for what you have, and maybe just maybe we'll be able to get our hands on that Mate 10 Pro at CES in more than a week away. Yeah, that's
Maybe, just maybe, those
pretty
fingers
close.
super crossed. Well, folks, I think we're going to put a pin in it. This episode of the Pocketnow Weekly has come and gone. The show is over, but the conversation continues on Twitter, where Jules is at Point Jules, and I'm humbly at Some Gadget Guy. Again, this is our end of the month mailbag episode, so I want to thank all the people that sent us questions to podcast@pocketnow.com and using the PN Weekly hashtag. We do collect all of those so that we can do a listener roundup episode at the end of the month. Pocketnow is around the web: Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Google+, YouTube, and our home sites, pocketnow.com and es.pocketnow.com for Spanish speakers. Shows like this cannot exist without your support. Sharing the weekly with your friends who love mobile technology. Those retweets matter. And by dropping reviews anywhere, you can review podcasts. Once again, we want to thank this week's sponsor, Oopsie or Upsy, depending on what host is reading the copy. Definitely check out oopsie.com and use Pocketnow as your promo code to start really taking advantage and keeping track of all of your warranties. But ultimately, there wouldn't be a show if it weren't for our listeners and subscribers who have kept us on the air since 2012. The Pocketnow Weekly will be back next week with all kinds of delicious technology goodness. So make sure you tune back in.